Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, all the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Hi, welcome to the Inside Scoop. My name is Marcus Simon, and I am here today as your host with two important guests. One of the newest members of the Virginia General Assembly and the newest members of the Fairfax County Delegation, Key-Gamara, and then the most experienced, the senior most, the dean of the Fairfax County Delegation, Delegate Vivian Watts. Vivian and Karen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we've got a bunch of stuff to get to here. We've just finished up an exciting legislative session, and we've gone through our reconvened session. So we have a pretty good idea of where most things stand, what the governor's vetoed. He's got a few more vetoes to go, what's passed, and so we'll have some good things to talk about. Let me start out by introducing you to our guests and letting them sort of introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Karen Key-Gamara. Karen, you are a freshman delegate. You were first elected to the House in 2023. Started serving this year, 2024. The pandemic has bent time for me, so I do know what year it is, though. So you started just this year in January, but you are not new to public service generally. So tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to the General Assembly.
Well, I was on the school board prior to now for 6 years, and prior to that I was a planning commissioner for a couple of years, and an education advocate, mom, and all-around decent person prior to that.
So this is not your first experience with elected office. You've been through elections and things like that. You've dealt with constituents and stuff, and I think it's interesting. We'll talk about this a little bit. You're one of a class of 20, I think, new delegates. We did have a lot of folks that this time around that have had some of that experience. So what was sort of surprising? But the House of Delegates is different, right? It's different than anything you've done before. Tell us a little bit about what surprised you about your arrival in Richmond and what you saw us doing and then what it turned out to be when you got there.
Well, I didn't really have expectations, quite frankly. I approached it as a learning experience. I was pleasantly surprised to see the level of cohesiveness amongst Democrats and especially the freshman class. And so I really wasn't, I expected some partisanship. I expected, some of those ideological fights. So it wasn't a total shock to me. Having been on the school board, you get a little bit accustomed to people disagreeing. But I was pleasantly surprised at how well especially some of the newer delegates worked together and supported one another. Yeah,
it was. We should tell our viewers, I guess, that if you don't know, our Virginia House of Delegates is controlled by Democrats now by the slimmest of possible margins. We have a 51-49 majority. So we lose somebody goes to sleep and oversleeps and misses their alarm, we could lose our majority just like that. And that did, I think, this session, and Vivian, you can chime in here too, because you've been around to several sessions, but I think the discipline of being at exactly 51-49 kind of forced us to be cohesive, right? It forced us all to work together. Nobody had the opportunity to be a free agent. I think it did bring us together. What were some of the things that you thought were sort of different about this session? And tell us a little bit about how many sessions you've been down in Richmond for.
Too many to number. I really can't remember. I started in as the active citizen for more than 15 years, always the numbers person. The best way I could help my kids' education was really tackle the budget for Fairfax County and tax policy and all of that. But run for office? Oh, no. I'm a nerd. I'm going to read the appendix of the budget. And women didn't run for office. So when I did, and I won't go into how that all happened, I was there'd only been 19 women ever elected before me in the General Assembly since women got the right to vote. So it was definitely a place there. In fact, they used to reprint the bills when a substitute would come out of committee, and it was bill prior to substitute Mr. Watts. They were not ready for it. But really, just as what drove me to get involved in so much as a citizen, loved the fact that the General Assembly, you are forced to look at such a variety of issues and deal with so many different things and see all of those threads that all weave together. Often something that you touched 10 years ago now has a new relevance. And for me particularly, I have been in the minority for all but 3 of the last 23 years. So definitely working with everybody is just the way that you deal. And you make whatever progress you can, however you can, earning trust, getting to know people, getting to know different sides of the state.
Yeah, absolutely. So Karen, you get to start in the majority, which is a little bit of you get spoiled a little bit, right? Because you have bills that actually pass, and
That's right.
you get some good committees that are relevant to your professional and your personal experience and things like that. So tell us, what committees are you serving on now in the General Assembly?
I serve with you on courts.
I know the answer. Tell them.
I serve with Delegate Watts on finance and also communications, technology, and innovation.
Oh, very good. And so which of those is your favorite?
Oh, goodness. That's hard to say.
I mean, you serve with me on courts. So.
Finance.
I will say that there is something special about each of the committees, right?
Look at that. Spoken like a mother of more than one child.
Well, I mean, you know, on communications, we're dealing a lot with AI and people trying to figure out what to do with TikTok. I was surprised, I guess, you asked earlier about the number of people who wanted to figure out how the state could regulate TikTok because of their view of China and how young people shouldn't perhaps participate. And so there was a little bit of ideological discussions happening there. In finance, I would say one of my favorite moments, I don't know if Delegate Watts remembers this, is when another freshman came forward and asked for tax deductions for gasoline cars. And you know, that led into trying to understand why and whether he accepted the environmental concerns that led to deductions for the other cars. And when he told me he had no data, it helped make the decision easier. So there's always something interesting.
Yeah, always something interesting. And Vivian, you've got a new role. Again, you've been on a number of committees. I think you're chairing the Finance Committee this year.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And you've served with me on courts for as long as I've been there. You've been in courts longer than I have. Mm-hmm. But this year you've got a new job on the Courts Committee. Tell us about that.
Well, this year I am chairing the Criminal Law Subcommittee, always called Crim Sub. I've always enjoyed the challenge. Mm-hmm. Now, both of you are attorneys.
Correct.
This one is not an attorney. And so here I am, more than 20 years experience on Crim Sub, and that's the one committee that traditionally is meeting when everybody else goes home, because you're absolutely precise about the fact pattern of whether you are or are not creating the proper definition of guilt, whether you're creating a loophole, whether you are tragically affecting the victim's life or the accused life. Very, very exacting. So actually it's a perfect fit in that, just as in tax policy, the devil's in the details. Mm-hmm. And so I really do enjoy that kind of concentration because it's real work. It's really not partisanship. You can have a very robust dialogue without, the bottom line still may have a partisan swing to it, but the question is doing it right. Mm-hmm. If you're going to do this, then do it right. And there was that kind of dialogue. So with the tremendous amount of turnover that we had in the House, as we looked at the Crim Subcommittee, my experience, and as it turned out, I was apprehensive at first because I really do respect the law. Mm-hmm. I respect the degree of discipline that it takes. And I still couldn't necessarily tell you some of these Latin terms, what they really mean. But nevertheless, the long experience in knowing what it takes to really be dealing in the criminal law, I think has paid off as far as my chairing it. I've got 3 new freshmen on the Democratic side, all of whom bring good, solid experience. They really read the material, really read the detail. So I think it has gone extremely well.
Yeah, it's one of the things we say about Crim Sub. Yeah, a lot of times in legislating, right, you hear this expression, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Let's pass something and we can make some progress. On Crim Sub, it's sort of the opposite. It's like, no, this needs to be perfect now. We need to get these words right. It's I think the phrase you hear a lot when I'm presenting bills there is, hey, on this committee, the words matter because people's lives and freedom and liberty hang in the balance here. If we got to say this right.
And certainly what Karen just said about digital, minors on the internet. How in the world do you shape law that you can possibly enforce? You can say I did something, but actually enforcing it and giving someone a false sense of security that somehow this isn't going to get to the child, when in fact, unfortunately or fortunately, it is still absolutely going to be the parent, the family, that is going to be your most effective block to all of this, as serious a problem as it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do find, and your predecessor in that role, Rob Bell, would often do this, that even, like you said, it's not always partisan. Sometimes you have different ideological attitudes about crime and punishment, and things will come down in a different way. But I do think that everybody on the committee is committed to, even if they're going to ultimately vote against the bill, right, to help the process to get it right. Yeah. Like, listen, I'm going to vote no on this thing no matter what happens, but I also can count, right? I know you guys are going to pass it, so if you're going to do it, then you ought to at least think about this, right? And that kind of conversation, I think people would be surprised sometimes to tune in.
How much it happens.
To see how much that happens, but particularly on that Crim Sub.
The humorous anecdote for Rob Bell is after the Virginia Tech tragedy and such a loss of life among students, we were working hard to change law as it dealt with determination of mental illness and safety and what might be the other types of oversight besides just institutionalization and so on. A tremendous amount of detail in a number of code sections. And Rob came up to me the next day and said, I was telling folks that Watson and I were having a nerd off last night. And from there on, I have embraced the honor of being called a nerd. It's okay.
Yeah. All right, so we've got a little less than a minute left to go here. So Karen, you've also, so you serve on courts, finance, and CTI. I'll call it CTI for now. You're also on some subcommittees, right? So we serve together on the civil law subcommittee. So we're not quite as exacting as the Crim Sub. Crim Sub is the one that meets late, and I think they probably get the largest volume of bills because everybody comes to Richmond and they've got a new crime they want to make. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Karen's experience on civil sub, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the bills that we've introduced and what we're sort of proud of, what passed, what didn't, and what we're going to do about it next year. So stay tuned. You're watching The Inside Scoop with Marcus Simon, Vivian Watts, and Karen Key-Gamara. We'll be right back.
Nice going, Spencer. I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We? Go to the door, ask for the ball back.
Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead. I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go.
Dad.
See ya, dude. See ya. You remember me and you're well.
Nice life. Some friends you are.
Keep smiling, keep shining.
Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about breakdown fight. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. We were having such a good conversation during the break. We almost didn't want to stop, but you're back with Marcus Simon. I'm your host today. I am joined by two of my colleagues, one of the newest and one of the most experienced members of the Fairfax delegation. So we've got Key-Gamara from Reston, and we've got Vivian Watts from Annandale. And we're together talking about the 2024 legislative session that's just finished up. And so right before the break, we were talking a lot about Crim Sub and Vivian's experience now as chairman of that. Karen, you and I served together on the Civil Sub, and it's also one of the less partisan sort of committees. We do a lot of substance. And we're all lawyers on that particular subcommittee. We all happen to be lawyers who practice, and so we have an opportunity to sort of legislate in the area that we practice. And tell us a little bit about how you found your experience on that subcommittee. I chair that one, so I'm sure she's going to say nothing but positive things.
Absolutely. I will say it's nice being in an atmosphere where everybody has a similar background. Right? And it's a little bit like going back to law school and having these very stimulating conversations about how law should operate, what's appropriate, what isn't appropriate, but at the same time addressing some of the concerns that are really bubbling in our society right now. Like, you know, how are we dealing with people who are being evicted? How are we addressing some of the concerns where people are not being, can't find affordable housing and things of that nature. Even attempts to deal with, I believe there was one law proposed that was a response to the 6-year-old shooting the teacher. But all the lawyers agreed that the proposed way to deal with it didn't meet muster.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we try not to, about being apolitical, right? So somebody would come in and so it was a sort of a sensation. We're going to hold schools and teachers liable for this. We're going to be able to sue them and so on and so forth. They're like, look, all that sounds great. Right. It's good for the headlines and it's good for the campaign trail. But we're in the General Assembly now, and let's talk about some of the practical difficulties of trying to do what it is that you want to do. And I think ultimately the patron ended up striking his bill. He kind of agreed with us that this wasn't going to be the right way to go. So,
and it was some of his colleagues from his party that helped him see that.
Yeah, well, that's sometimes right. And sometimes there's a little bit of that, right? We take care of our own. Like these, the Republicans said, look, we got this one. You don't need to embarrass him. We'll get you the right result without having to do it that way. So you had one of your bigger successes. It was a bill that went through our Civil Subcommittee. It had a little bit of fit and start, but tell us about, I was going to ask you what your favorite bills, but just tell us about this one. Tell us about it was a pretty big bill for a freshman to carry. So tell us about your bill to end child marriage in Virginia.
Right. This was the marriage bill. A number of women's groups there's an international effort to end child marriage. Typically, irrespective of where you are, it is children, much younger girls, marrying significantly older men. The belief is that first of all, marriage is an adult responsibility. And the statistics regarding child marriage in the United States is just horrible. Really, they are less educated. They oftentimes don't have medical coverage. They don't have access to legal redress. And they experience a great deal of trauma. There's also the belief that when an older man, who typically, if they were sexually involved with a younger child, that would be a crime, right? That would be sexual assault. That would be rape, unless you marry them. And so this cuts all of that off, and I believe it protects primarily our daughters, but sometimes it can be young men as well. And so I'm very proud that we were able to do that together as Democrats.
Very good. And so Vivian, you had some bills that went better and some that went worse. So tell us, what was is there a particular bill that stands out this session that you were really proud of your ability to get it through the House of Delegates and the Senate and get it signed by the governor. And there's probably some that didn't get signed, but when they got signed.
Actually, let me sort of sparse that a little bit.
Sure.
One of the bills that I think I was proudest of, because I've worked with several others for 4 or 5 years, the situation when someone is in mental crisis and law enforcement is brought in, and what happens? And there have been too many tragedies. One, even more so than the racial profile, people with a mental illness profile are more apt to be killed by police. So it's just one of those things where you don't know what you're stepping into. And when I say mental, I'm talking about brain disability as well. So I'm talking about even Alzheimer's as well as autism, things where the person under stress is just not reasoning in the same way that law enforcement may be expecting.
Right.
Well, the bill is a bill that assault is touching. Pure touching is assault. So anyone that I might be accused of assaulting, it would have been just a pure touch and it would be a misdemeanor. No permanent prison record, nothing that I have to declare where I can't get housing, can't get a job, like a felony. If you touch a law enforcement officer, you can be charged with felonious assault, and all of those negatives follow with that. I particularly think of a graduate of Woodson High School who in her 30s, over a month's period, had 5 different mental crises where law enforcement was brought in. 4 times Fairfax County dealt with it and got her into some services, obviously not adequate because she had another.
Right.
Once during that time, Alexandria police were involved and they charged felonious assault. She was being held in Fairfax County Jail, and by the time she was transferred, there's more to the story, she died in transport. So trying to deal with a different way of dealing with this, we finally came up with the right approach, that an affirmative defense, should you be charged with felonious assault, would be, here is my mental health, my disability history, and very often then everything would be dismissed. But meanwhile, law enforcement can go ahead at the time, do what needs to be done, and not be concerned that their hands are tied. And that's what we finally resolved with all of the law enforcement contacts that I had. We passed the bill. The governor's veto echoed the same language that would have been true before our getting the bill resolved, saying you're tying law enforcement hands to not allow them to do that. No, 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 you can. So this was both a very proud accomplishment, but an incredible disappointment on behalf of particularly the autism community that it was vetoed.
Yeah, so,
and we're going to have to start over again.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. It's not funny. It's interesting. A lot of the governor's veto statements did not seem to accurately reflect
the bill
the underlying bill, right? And so either he wasn't reading them or wasn't paying attention, or he had too many, right? Because I think we had 183, 184 vetoes.
156 vetoes,
156.
233 amendments to the budget, and I can't remember how many.
I think I'm getting into 180 because I'm counting the bills that he attempted to amend that we've rejected, so I'm anticipating some more vetoes. But over 150 vetoes, more vetoes by one governor in one session than any previous governors had in their entire term, by a lot.
By a lot. The closest in any one session was 40.
Yeah. So Karen, again, this is not normal, right? As the new number.
I'm glad it's not normal.
But that did happen a lot. So you had a bill vetoed as well. Will you want to tell us about that? Any in particular that stick out as again sort of being disappointing?
Well, I think there's a couple, but the one that bothers me the most dealt with workers. It was a workers' comp bill. And I actually worked both with employer representatives and employee representatives. And it had to deal with accidents that occurred where you didn't have an eyewitness or slip and fall and things of that nature. Initially, we started out by trying to change the burden of proof so it wouldn't be so difficult. We eventually found a case law that spelled out what could be presented. And so it wasn't it didn't change the existing burden of proof, but everyone agreed. People on the employee side and people on the employer side. And we had found peace in the valley. But the governor did not understand that, couldn't explain it. And, you know, I will say I've heard from people on both sides that they want to help me bring that back, because it really did send a positive message to workers that we want to take care of you. We need healthy boundaries for you to recover, but we don't want you in a situation where you can't recover when you should. And so I just thought it was one of those places where Virginians were coming together to take care of one another, and we have so many worker shortages. I thought it was a really positive thing. But I'm hoping moving forward that the governor will be more willing to have conversations to understand what the real purpose is behind what we're doing.
Yeah, you know, it's funny that you mentioned that. It's the we put so much work, and you talked about your freshman class in particular, right? I think they understood, right, that we want to come up with a compromise, right? We know that these bills are going to a Republican governor's desk for signature, right? And so we work with folks on both sides who spent all this time and effort, Vivian, getting the language right on what's the right compromise for assault and battery. You know, bringing all the stakeholders together, employers and employees. We spent all this time and effort to get it right, and it feels like the governor wasn't paying attention to that process at all. The bill comes across his desk. We did send him a lot. I mean, we sent him over 1,000 bills, and he just took sort of that knee-jerk reaction. Oh, this is this bill. This is what this bill's about. I know this bill, and I'm going to veto it, as opposed to taking the time. And I think some of that probably came, and Vivian, you'll maybe share this observation as well. I'm used to seeing someone from the administration sitting in our committee meetings and subcommittee meetings watching. Did you notice? I didn't see his. I mean, I'd ask sometimes, is there anybody from the administration here? Do you have a position on this? And crickets.
They weren't there. And after the fact, I've had some good conversations, but we're talking about just a week or so before the veto override session itself. Only then. And then the administration agency, oh yeah, I see what you're trying to do, got it, I like that, yeah. And it was most unfortunate and most unusual.
Yeah, and again, I think part of our problem was, one of the challenges was, at least on my part, you know, I assumed that when I got the Republican delegates on board with me, that there was some sort of level of communication between the Republicans in the House, the Republicans in the Senate, and the Republicans in the governor's mansion. As it turns out, there really wasn't very much of that going on at all. I had a bill that the trial lawyers really wanted, that I worked with Jason Ballard, a Republican, on. He was my chief co-patron. It came out of the House 99-1, came out of the Senate, I think 40-0, and we still had to fight with the governors and the Attorney General's office to get him to sign it, because there was a concern, again, it looked like something that it wasn't. So, listen, we're going to talk more about the governor, this governor, and you know, the session generally. The governor actually didn't really accomplish much. He failed on a couple of his big initiatives, including an arena and some other things he was trying to do. We have some theories as to why that might be. And when we get back after the next break, we'll explore where the governor went wrong and what he could have done better. So we'll be back right after this.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
I got to just sort of backseat chair.
Right.
It was a lot of fun.
Right.
I got a crick in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. That I was scared of. Very sadness. But if you throw me out, I'll throw you some more.
It's a big responsibility.
Oh, it's huge. I know, it's huge.
And the salary.
Oh my god, yes.
Right?
I mean, like, I was about to move in with my parents, and right before, yeah, so this saved me.
I really believe in you, you know?
Thank you. It's nice to hear that from someone.
These are cool. Did you, what did you?
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. Once again, I'm your host, Marcus Simon, member of the House of Delegates, representing the Falls Church area. I am joined by two of my colleagues, Vivian Watts from Annandale and Karen Key-Gamara of Reston. We were just talking about, we just finished talking about some of our personal agendas and accomplishments during the session, starting to talk about some of the governor's failings generally. So let's back up. And Vivian, you chair the Finance Committee, and we were watching the governor's introduced budget for a while. So, one of the things that didn't get done this session is we don't have a budget. We finished our work on it. The House and the Senate finished, the Democrats finished a budget. The governor sent us back 233 specific line amendments, which is literally impossible to get through in the time we have to do a reconvene session. So ultimately we ended up scrapping that budget, and we've agreed to start over. But tell us sort of how you think the governor maybe got off on the wrong foot with the budget. Where do you think he started to go wrong?
Well, let me start by saying, when you said the Democrats passed the budget, we had 20 Republican votes.
That's true. It was a very bipartisan budget.
So it definitely was bipartisan. So back to your question as worded, where did he go wrong? He had a major tax package that was part of the budget. And I was fascinated that senior members would not carry that package. And when it was finally introduced by someone who normally would not be introducing tax legislation, it didn't have any co-signatures on it. So that says volumes about the tax package, because the tax package was sold as being, first of all, an across-the-board cut of the income tax. Well, he cut all rates by 12%. So 12% of a 2% rate versus 12% of a 5 3/4% rate, he cut the upper rates 3 times as much as he did the lower rates. And then to make up for that, he says, oh, well, I'm going to raise the sales tax. The sales tax on laundry soap and spark plugs and everything that you buy, I'm going to raise it almost a penny, 0.9, not quite a penny, 0.9. That was another poison pill, as I heard almost immediately from the Republican colleagues that I work with on taxes. And so the one thing that he did have in it, though, I found very interesting, because I've introduced that very same provision, and that is to close a major loophole, which he described as a major loophole in taxing digital. Given that anything digital has changed tremendously in the recent years. So you're going to pay a tax if you get your TV watching through cable or satellite. But any other kind of streaming, or if you're watching it on your computer or iPhone, or if you're also got other kinds of downloading, or you went out and bought some sort of a disc, whether you were under contract or whether you actually bought the item of the movie or whatever it may be, no taxes at all. So this kind of inequity, the governor rightly put his finger right on it. So looking at the budget and looking at what was not put in for the major lacks that we have, particularly in K through 12 spending, which had been a major study that had been released just before the General Assembly met about how far behind Virginia was, the budget committees, and again, I said it back when I was cabinet secretary, and I will say it again, before I introduce the governor, because after all, governors come and go, we're the only state with a single-term governor, let me introduce the really important people in the room. That was covering a flub that I made. But that's when I introduced the chairman of the Money Committee and the president of the Senate and so on. And that did not go on. And the reason I tied those two together is that all of us, have a vested interest because we're going to be there when the governor is not, one-term governor. And we have a tremendous responsibility for the legacy of whatever we do, partly because we're going to have to deal with it. So when you looked at particularly the very serious needs we have in K through 12, as well as dealing with mental health in particular, these are areas that were cut severely in the governor's budget, the budget that passed the House and bipartisan budget that passed the House and Senate, filled those gaps by keeping the digital tax loophole aspect.
Yeah, so it's interesting, just so our viewers understand. So the governor proposed a budget that and had revenue from certain tax increases, right? He offset them with tax cuts, but he couldn't get a Republican member of the House or Senate to introduce a bill that would actually implement
eventually
those taxes.
Did.
Oh,
Eventually
he did get Buddy Fowler to do it, who's a loyal soldier and was willing to do that one in a very, very safe seat. Yeah, again, and I think this goes, we were talking about this a little bit during one of the breaks, and Karen sort of observed it with the way the veto didn't quite match the bill, but he seems to want it, having no experience in government and knowing how things work, he just sort of goes the textbook way, which is you take turns, right? And things go back and forth through this process, but misses the piece where you actually need to collaborate up front, enroll people at the beginning of the process, find out where their red lines are. Like, hey, this is never going to go anywhere. If we start here, there's no point in having a back and forth because this is never going to work. Maybe we should start from a different starting place. And he seems to sort of either doesn't understand or doesn't have people behind him to explain that to him, or doesn't go through that process at all. So one of the other things that the governor tried to do this session that didn't go anywhere, and else to either one of you, maybe I'll let Karen start and see, is a couple of things, proposals that went flat. Let me start with this one, because and I don't know if this is how much we can blame the governor for this one. This may not be the governor's, but because you're from Reston, I know there was a lot of concern in the Reston community about early proposals early in the session to put a casino right there at Wheelie Avenue, at the Wheelie Avenue Metro Station. Tell us a little bit about what happened there and what your thoughts are about that whole process.
So let me clarify. My district includes Reston, parts of Oakton, parts of Herndon. While I was running, well, even prior to my running, there was discussions about placing a casino in Reston by the Wheelie Metro. The people of Reston were vehemently against that. I think part of the problem was that this was a proposal by a local business person who was making some significant donations to a number of legislators and asking that this be approved in the legislature. The people felt as though the legislature shouldn't be for sale. I mean, it's plain and simple. And they also felt that the quality of life in Reston, Oakton, and Herndon shouldn't be determined by a simple business decision. I happen to agree with that. We are legislators who represent the public interest, right? And so I went there to represent those interests. I think it fell flat again because it was one of those things that was just kind of almost forced on the people. There was no discussion. Not even the Board of Supervisors were aware of it. I don't know who exactly people were talking to. No people from that particular part of the county were supporting it or proposing it. And so it kind of, one of the things that rubbed some of my constituents is this some sort of taxation without representation? We didn't ask for this, where is this coming from? So it really can't cut across the grate of how we see democracy And I think that was the beginning of the end of its downfall.
Yeah,
and if I can just speak to the merits of the proposal.
Sure.
One of the things that irritates me most, but I well understand that talking about taxes, third rail of politics, how dare I, but oh, well, we could raise this money by gambling. Well, I'm sorry, but I really believe in tax fairness and trying to tax where you have ability to pay. And so there I go in and out of my 7-Elevens about 3 or 4 times a week getting my big gulp refilled. So I'm seeing everybody on the gray machines that we were dealing with. Okay, that's a great way to raise money. No, those people should not be where we're raising our money from through this means. Then there came along the casino idea for Reston, Tyson's Corner area. And I'm just scratching my head that we're thinking that, first of all, that this is going to compete with National Harbor and that it really will be a tourist draw. And then I'm looking at the only reason why I have supported casinos a number of years ago was because we have such a problem in jobs in Appalachia and parts of the Northern Neck and also parts of Southside. So if you had a casino, because don't forget, Las Vegas started in the desert. If you had a casino that was developed properly, it could be a tourist job, a tourist attraction, and be a real source of jobs. And also, if you're, I still don't even like this, but at least the gambling is going on in high income, not the slot machine type of gambling. And so the idea that those possible justifications would be applied to Tyson's Corner Reston just didn't track.
Yeah, I think it definitely lacked that economic development piece of it, right? That it's something that was needed to sort of create some stimulus for the region. It's sort of hard to explain, given all the construction cranes and everything we see in Reston.
Transportation problems.
Right. So it did seem like an odd fit. All right, we got less than 2 minutes, so I'm not going to get into the arena right now. We're going to come back to the arena in just a second. Marijuana, real quick, if we can do marijuana in under 2 minutes, right? But that's another issue that we had some consensus on. The governor sort of dug his heels in, right, on that and just said, I'm not listening to anything you guys have to say. Do you have any observations about the debate over marijuana policy?
We're left in the worst of all worlds, that it's been legalized, but it's not being regulated. There's a major sting that has just gone on in the far southwest, where we can't sell it legally, but I can sell you a T-shirt at a certain price and give you as a gift some marijuana. So not only the state police, local law enforcement, as well as the federal feds are in on this, and there's been a major sting on these operations. But this is what's going on because it's not regulated as it desperately needs to be.
And I mean, what bothers me about that is it just feels like a government failure, right? Our communities need us to provide guidance so that the markets are safe. Right now, they're not safe. I do a lot of work, and I work with young people, and they are getting a hold of people from this market that the governor didn't want to recognize, didn't want to regulate. Well, there is a market, it's just not legal.
Yeah. So, all right, well, these segments go super quick with you guys. This is great. So we've got one more to go, and we're going to try and hit some of the highlights and maybe do a lightning round on some of the topics that we haven't been able to get to yet, and make sure we cover everything that happened this General Assembly session. So you are watching The Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Marcus Simon, joined by my colleagues, Delegate Vivian Watts and Delegate Key-Gamara. We'll be right back after this.
Your time is going to come. Your time is gonna come. It's up to you to reach out to be that friend who comes along. Your day is gonna come.
When you make a friend, you make a difference.
Your day is gonna come.
Friendship, pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Good one, son.
Last summer, my new dad took me on vacation. First, we went deep sea fishing.
Wow! I'm so proud of you, son.
And then we went on Thunder Shark. That was awesome! Let's go again. 3 times. I gotta say,
It was pretty cool.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of kids in foster care will take you just as you are.
What's it feel like when a woman's having a heart attack? Chest pain, like there's a ton of weight on your chest. Severe shortness of breath. Unexplained nausea. Cold sweats. There's an unusual tiredness and fatigue. There's unfamiliar dizziness or lightheadedness. Unusual pain in your back, neck, jaw, one or both arms, even your upper stomach are signs you're having a heart attack. Don't make excuses. Make the call to 911 immediately. Learn more at womenshealth.gov/heart attack.
Operation Wonder Park is a go!
There's nothing more powerful than imagination.
Honey, have you seen my cell phone?
But don't just imagine.
My park came to life?
Ooh, a plot twist.
Use STEM to build, create.
She did it.
And change the world.
Who's with me?
I'm more of a 2 feet on the ground kind of guy.
It's gonna hurt tomorrow.
If she can STEM, so can you. Find out more at She Can STEM.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back, and thank you for sticking with us. I'm your host, Marcus Simon. I am back with Delegate Vivian Watts and Delegate Key-Gamara. And right before the break, we were just finishing up with a little bit of a conversation about marijuana policy. During the break, we realized we had a couple more things to say about that. So, Vivian, did you want to go ahead and share another anecdote?
I was just going to quickly share my reaction from almost the beginning. It's like right after Prohibition, that you had all these stills in the backyard, and who knew what you were drinking in White Lightning? And now we're in that same situation. As everyone has said, today's marijuana is not your college marijuana, whatever it may have been. And until the feds really step in and put the same kind of regulation where we know the content of THC and other elements of it, we are in a very dangerous situation. And I hope that finally we can break that sooner than later.
And Karen, you see some of this actually playing out in your day job, right? In your real legal work.
Well, I mean, first of all, these items are, this drug is readily available. And what we're seeing is young people really being thrown into a type of psychosis like we never have seen before. And so it really is expanding some of the mental health concerns, and we don't have the services that we need. So this is really a crisis, and I do hope that the governor will come to the table and talk about it.
All right, so speaking of things that the governor really is royally screwed up, let's talk about the arena deal, right? So what happened there, right? It started off, we had this big announcement, everybody was down at Potomac Yard, and they had the big tents, and the news was there. Ted Leonsis say, "Oh, we're shaking hands," as if it was a done deal, but clearly it was anything but a done deal. So what went wrong there?
So, all right. So I have voted against every football team coming to Virginia, and I've been at it for a while because it's such a short season. But when you've got two major league teams that have long seasons, and so you're talking about 100 games plus, and you're on 12 acres of 40 acres, and you've got some transportation with Metro, it needs to be improved, but you've got a catalyst that possibly, and also it has nothing to do with anything, but yeah, I am a Caps fan and I get to about a half a dozen games a year. Reason I mention that is because I know how the arena works and what needs to be around it and what it can stimulate as far as good urban development. So potentially that was there. And then comes the governor. Now, also over the years on Finance Committee, I have agreed with proposals throughout the state, never in Northern Virginia, but throughout the state, that we will fund this public arena, convention center, et cetera, through the revenue that it generates, because without it being there, there wouldn't be the revenue. And ultimately, we come up with something. Now, I'm going to say that 3/4 of the time it never materializes, but this is part of the financing package. So I was expecting that kind of financing package for scrutiny would be available. And it wasn't. It simply wasn't. There, you had every reason to believe that something credible could be put together, but it was never, and again, the problem of not talking to the senior members about it. Will the NBA and the NHL really make sure that these bonds never fail? They said they would. Now, is this in writing? We have had this kind of revenue financing, quite frankly, since the 1960s, and nothing has ever come back on the taxpayers. Well, that was not communicated because I really don't think it was known that about the AAA bond-rated state and how we manage our finances to hold on to that AAA bond rating. So bottom line, as I mentioned that, I am concerned that both the delay of the budget and this kind of falling apart of the arena proposal all tend to be clouds on that AAA bond rating, because both it and the reputation that we are ranked as a good place to do business, one of the first things you're looking for on those ratings is reliability. Yep. Can you depend upon the decisions coming out of Virginia, that they're sound decisions and will pass the test of time? And this is a problem.
So Karen, as a first timer going in, did you have different expectations about how the arena would go? Did you think it was going to happen or not happen?
I didn't think it was going to pass. And I will say, just to piggyback a little bit on what Delegate Watts is saying, it is concerning that the images that are coming out, the backwards budget tour, the language going back and forth that is not respectful of what has happened in the past, right? And how it's okay to disagree, but do we have to be disagreeable? And I worry about the image that it's creating, not just to the business community, but to our own constituents. And so I think it's time for some real soul searching and some real, meeting of the minds at a real table that puts the public interest first and worries a little bit less about sound bites.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I do, one of my observations too is, I think Louise Lucas goes to the budget issue as well. I think she said recently we're finally talking. Mm-hmm. And she came out against the arena from the very beginning, the chair of the Senate Finance and Appropriation, well, they're Finance and Appropriations, we call it Finance. But she said, I'm against it. They're like, oh, what does she want? She's negotiating. She's not really against it. She just wants something for Hampton Roads. She's just being transactional. And it's like, no, she meant it, what she said. She has substantive answers, but nobody paid her the respect to actually go talk to her and find out what her real legitimate concerns were. Mm-hmm. I think that was a big part of the problem.
And again, I have to underscore, because again, I'd served as Secretary of Transportation, and I knew from those 4 years as we really transformed what transportation was, this goes way back, to where we were no longer pay-as-you go, but how you do the revenue and what the various classes of bonds were. So I was familiar with that. I asked what I thought was a softball question 4 weeks after it had been announced, and got almost a deer in the headlight response, not knowing which of the bond mechanisms would be used. So that too is an element of not just personal relationships, but also knowing Virginia governance.
Yeah. So a couple issues we haven't talked about yet, and it may be obvious why, but gun violence prevention, right? I mean, we did a lot of good stuff during our session on gun violence prevention, but I mean, what happened what would the governor do with all of those bills?
I'll say one that was, I knew that the governor wouldn't sign on to all of the proposals. I didn't think we'd get an assault weapons ban. But I was surprised to see that there was a bill prohibiting guns in hospitals, right? Hindering people's ability to provide health care to our citizens. I thought that was a place we could meet. I was wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was a surprise, and you put all these out there. I did find, and the governor will say, well, he did pass a ban on auto sears, right, which are these devices you use to turn a semi-automatic weapon, allow it to fire rapidly like an automatic weapon. Those are already illegal at the federal level, right?
Yes.
So and he did pass a bill that made it a crime to carry a gun that had the serial number, the federal serial number already destroyed, also already a federal crime. So they were willing to at least add state charges to things that were already illegal, right?
But not ghost guns. And what does ghost guns have to do with all of the Second Amendment arguments about the right to own a gun when you're producing it out of plastic?
Yeah.
Right.
It's something that is still lethal?
So, yeah, one other issue where nothing happened, and I guess it's probably a good thing, well, not nothing, but not a lot. So women's health and abortion access, right? There was some talk at the beginning of session. The governor talked about having a 15-week abortion ban. I don't think ultimately anybody introduced that. There was a bill for an absolute ban that was introduced, and we had a hearing. We actually had a similar bill on the floor that we talked about. Where did we wind up? We have about 3.5 minutes left. Where did we wind up with women's health issues? How do you think we did on that?
Well, this was one bill that I was surprised that I carried that actually, given everything else was vetoed, this one was not vetoed, and this said that you cannot do a search warrant, you can't have a subpoena to go after menstrual data. Now, if menstrual data is part of my health records, fine, but I think I'm accurate. More than a third of the women track their menstrual cycle on an app, and it's that cannot be tracked. And quite frankly, you can't get a search warrant unless you have a reason to think there's a crime. Well, the only crime involved here is being a woman who happens to be in her childbearing years. So this, though, the governor, now I worked carefully to make sure that the hospitals knew exactly what they could release and make sure that it all, that was signed. What surprises me then with everything else that was vetoed, including your right to birth control, etc., was that if you respect privacy in what I just described as far as my menstrual data, you ought to be honoring privacy in all my healthcare decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think the one that was most shocking to me was not having the right to contraceptions. I mean, we're still waiting to hear about that, but it leaves me speechless, quite frankly, to think that that's something I have to discuss with the governor, the government, or any woman has to discuss.
Or man.
Yes.
So, and then I guess the other issue that we talk about perennially, and rarely does anything seem to happen, and maybe someday we'll get together, is on campaign finance reform. Not a great year again for campaign finance reform. Keep plugging away. You alluded earlier to the public's, when it becomes very obvious, hey, I'm going to wine and dine these specific legislators and make really large campaign contributions, and then propose a casino that they're in control of. It almost takes something like that to catch anybody's attention. But we spent millions of dollars, right, in just a few of these races in 2023. You guys have any hope for future prospects for campaign finance reform?
I hope we have good discussions about how to be able to implement it, because the bad thing about where we are politically is that things don't have to be true for them to become a headline. And there is a real premium on misinformation. So my concern in setting something up, which I hope will be more like regulating attorneys, which I think is very respectful and appropriate, is that we allow that appropriate level of accountability and due process so that it doesn't become a mechanism by which let me get this accusation in because there's an election coming. That would be terribly unfair.
Yeah, it's the gotcha stuff that you got to be watching
Gotcha stuff, but also if you're close to the line, take 10 steps back. It's still...
Absolutely.
Always good advice. Hey, listen, this time flew. We could have done 2 or 3 hours. This has been great. I really enjoyed it. Hope that you guys learned a little bit of something about what happened during our 2024 legislative session. You've been watching your host, Marcus Simon, with our guests, Vivian Watts of Annandale and Karen Key-Gamara. Stay tuned and tune in again for the next episode of The Inside Scoop.